Hey everybody, just a quick word to say sorry about the audio quality on this podcast. I happened to be working from a distance that week while my kids were off of school, and I forgot to hit the button, so my mic did not work the way it was supposed to, so I'm on Apple AirPods, which is just not that great for a podcast, but be that as it may, our guest, Jason Clark, was fantastic, talking about consumerism in the church and just a really deep discussion about it. So I hope you enjoy it. Listen, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. Subscribe via Apple iTunes or wherever you happen to do your subscribing to podcasts. Leave us a review. Send us a suggestion as to what you might like to hear us talk about, and we will do our best to do so. As always, thanks for listening. Tell us about us to your friends, strangers on the street. Maybe make a mask with a Rabbit Trails podcast. I'm sorry. No. Anyway, thanks for stopping by.
Hey everybody, welcome to Rabbit Trails podcast number whatever this is. I've lost track, don't know.
We're in the 30s.
I'm technically on vacation, so don't hold me to account on anything. We've got a great podcast for you today. But Garrick, it's good to see you, man. I feel like it's been a long time since you and I recorded.
It has been. We recorded a bunch back to back to back, and then we kind of went our separate ways for
We've been letting those out into the ether of the internet, and it's been nice.
Yes.
But yeah, so I'm taking a break in my family skiing in order to do this, but I think it's going to be worth it.
It's going to be great.
We have a friend of yours, Jason Clark, on. I'll let you introduce Jason.
Yeah, Jason is a good friend. I met Jason. He's mainly through my experience. He's the lead mentor of Portland Seminary's Global Leadership and Perspectives D-Min program, and he was kind enough to give me a doctorate. So I'm very appreciative of him.
Garrick.
Yes. And but also church planner, a pastor for Sutton Vineyard in one of the greatest cities in the world, London, England. And three kids, is that correct?
I do. Three kids. Yeah.
Wife, motorcycle enthusiast as well.
I sold my motorbike.
Oh, you sold your but
COVID.
Okay, still.
Yeah, sad day, but realized I was getting older and I've taken up canal boating instead.
Oh, wow.
I'm 50.
Well, that's fascinating.
Well, as one is wont to do when one gives up motorcycling, the next thing I hear, it's like number 2 on the things to do after motorcycling.
Narrow boating.
Canal boating.
So is that rowing?
Lots of middle-aged men have motorbikes, but I just realized I wasn't riding it very much, and I'll come back to it. But I had a narrowboat holiday because COVID cancelled everything, and I was supposed to be in South Africa with my wife for my 30th wedding anniversary, and instead we were on a narrowboat. We have canals in the UK, and these narrowboats, and we rented one, and it was in September, beautiful, sunny, and it was so enjoyable.
Okay,
I think I'll do that instead.
So
do you wear leather chaps for that as well?
I've never worn leather chaps for anything.
Okay. Oh, I'm a little disappointed.
Contrary to all rumors.
The canal system, because that I have a little bit of experience. I was in Scotland a few years ago, and we visited the Falkirk Wheel. I don't know if you, which is the boat elevator for the canal system. Yeah. And so is that basically the same thing, kind of traveling through canals like that?
Canal systems in the UK from, early 19th century. And they were before train lines, were the way that stuff got around the UK. So a dray horse would drag a long boat full of coal or stuff along these. So they would make these cuttings with water. So basically a river but they were called canals. Okay. A whole network, loads of them in the UK. I mean, lots of them in disrepair and closed. But and they were one of the. Sorry, I'm a bit of a nerd on this because I just read too many. I started reading. My wife said, "What are you reading?" I said, "I'm reading." I've subscribed to a history book of canals in the UK. And my wife is like, "How old are you?" Anyway, I think
it's fascinating. Yeah.
Have you heard the phrase "legging it"?
Yeah.
Got to leg it. That's the canal boat term, a narrow boat term.
Really?
So these boats didn't have engines. So when they were going through a tunnel, the guys would have to line the side and put their legs on the walls of the tunnel, lean back, and they would use their legs, cross their legs over, and take the boat through the tunnel. It was called legging it.
Ah, yeah.
No
So
way.
the phrase leg it was to run quickly, but leg it, we need to leg it, is an old canal boat term. But anyway, so one of the sad things about them, just as they invested millions in the canal boat system, at the same time in the UK, trains, steam engines emerged. So they spent millions, hundreds of millions in today's terms on these systems, and then very quickly, within 10 years, went bankrupt because everything moved to steam trains and stuff. So, but there's a bit of a renaissance going on canal boats, people slowing down. It's a different pace of life. Because I hired this boat with my wife. It's hilarious. You're going along at 2-3 mile an hour and people walk past you. You wave at them. That's how slow life goes on a canal boat. If you want to slow down, a canal boat, and there's beautiful places in the UK, some of the most beautiful countryside.
Yeah,
that's really cool. The investment story kind of sounds like my decision to invest heavily in beepers, pagers, right around the time of cell phones. I'm just kidding. The only doctors still use those things, but if anyone invested in those long ago, you're in trouble now.
Yeah.
That's I think there's a really good segue. Well, first of all, I'll say I knew Jason was going to be awesome on this podcast because you kind of know everything about everything. You're kind of like Barrett and I. We know a lot of stuff. Just
I know
have a lot of
very
information
little about very much.
Yes. Okay. That's it. That's what I wanted to say. Although what was your PhD in? What was your?
My PhD in theology was an account of the relationship between evangelicalism and capitalism.
That's right.
So how had it intensified in this? How did it get to the mess that it's in now, and why?
Okay, so just read us your dissertation then, because we could talk about that for days. Go on.
So that was it. 8 years of my life, many thousands of hours of reading and writing because the main reason I did it, I was tired of people that weren't evangelicals claiming the obvious, that evangelicalism is just in bed with capitalism and consumerism, but without diagnosing where it was or how it was. So I sort of wanted to own up to it and go, okay, so how can someone who's evangelical theologically own up to this, but so we can deal with the problems ourselves instead of the usual, because I was trying to deal with some of the craziness that goes on in response where people throw the baby out with the bathwater. So that was the idea of the project, and from being a pastor, because that's what I see day to day in church life. The church is dispensing religious goods and services to consumers. So how did we end up there? Whether you're evangelical, I mean, you don't have to be evangelical. That's just the normal mode of everyday life in Western culture, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, so how did we? How did we end up? And because I think for Barrett and I, we noticed it a little bit in Western European evangelicalism in Spain. But it seems to feel more coming from the lens of the U.S., where that, obviously there's U.S. has kind of gotten good at kind of.
So at the heart of it all is a disposition towards everything in life, which comes from capitalism per se is not. I mean, that's one of the things I say is not. It's not good or bad. It just is. It can be bad. So you've got capitalism, consumerism, and commodification. So capitalism is it's social arrangements and technical things for recently modern invention in history. Consumerism is the culture around capitalism, and then commodification is the most pernicious problem. So actually, one of the things I focused a lot on was commodification. And at the heart of that is everywhere in the world, and not just the West, but my focus was on the West. Why we keep everything at arm's length. I mean, this is a mixture of things. Secularism's another one, but my life, it's my castle. I pick and mix what I need when I need it. I go there to get something. And that affects my relationships, how I belong to things. And basically we use things in life. And we end up in a place where the church even Jesus is someone to go to when I need something else. He's not a way of life. He is someone to give me something for the life that I want. So I was looking at, how did we end up there where we are the center of life? I make the life I want, and God, Jesus, the church, my faith are just a resource to plug in and get me what I want when I want it. How did we get there? Well, began with the Industrial Revolution, commercial society, and the ability to be consumers. And some of the genesis is, I'll give you a couple of probably stories are the easiest, the way to know it. So the printing press and the ability to print leaflets. I mean, hundreds of thousands of leaflets being produced by the Bible Society in the UK to explain the gospel. It was incredibly evangelistic and powerful. But what you end up with is you end up generating from something that's Christian. So evangelicals did this. They were at the forefront of using technology. So embraced printing and technology. But then what you do is you develop a printing market. And then suddenly something that was used for one purpose is used for something else. Sermons, great preachers, people like Spurgeon. There was a thing called sermon tasting. So the wealthier middle classes who were able to, because of transport, travel around London, were able to visit different the equivalent of mega churches. And they called it sermon tasting. Go and hear the person preaching that you want. So you have this embrace of new communication styles that quickly turn into consumption. Or some other examples. I don't want to get too technical, but the whole music industry, printing of music and hymnody and all that stuff turned into a whole industry. So before you know it, something that was at the forefront of technology and the benefits of emerging global capitalism turn into modes of consumption and create markets. There's also something else that goes on in there without being too technical, but crudely, see if I can summarize this. So it's hard for us to understand a world that previously was Catholic, and the church mediated everything. And you had indulgences, Luther stood against those. From the Reformation and the Protestant Reformation, most people's lives were pretty brutal and pretty short, subject to war, plagues, early death. And the consolations of the Catholic faith and church and absolution and, being told that you were going to be saved, there was an enormous amount of anxiety in the Protestant Reformation. So one of the things that happened was, how did you know that you were saved if you were a Protestant? And one of the things I looked at was the issue of providence. So for Protestants, if it's not the priest saying you're saved, one of the ways that you knew you were saved is, you were prospering. God provided stuff. Does that sound familiar? Lots of evangelicals still think the proof that God is involved in their life is that he gives them stuff. And that was happening at exactly the time when the industrial world was changing. And actually, you can say Protestants, certainly Protestants, and then definitely evangelicals with Methodists, it was a symbiotic relationship. They grew the economy just because of printing and music and travel. These were all Christian things that were possible. So there's this sort of symbiosis. But so what I looked at was somewhere in there, this idea that God provided you, providence, becomes the evidence that God's at work in your life. Well, it doesn't take much for that to become everything. So if God is God, and I know as a pastor, most of the time I'm dealing with people who are disappointed that they didn't get something in life. God isn't God because I didn't get the house I wanted or the holidays I want or so how did we end up there? And the prayers, and so ultimately the prayers we pray, I said, are diagnostic. Look at what we pray for. Jobs, homes, and relationships. Usually the three most important things in life. So there you go.
Yeah.
Rambling overview.
I had it. No, that's fascinating. And it's two just quick points to add into that. Barrett and I talk a lot about this as well. Within evangelicalism, even I think that's been transposed even into ministry now, where if you're having success, God's blessing you. And if maybe if your ministry's not going as well or not seeing the, and so we have entire structures that are, and I think there's some nuance obviously there. I'm not, you want to, obviously if you're going to invest money into certain efforts, you want to see them pay off to some degree. But I also remember an Alpha course in Dallas, Texas, which is a very, very consumeristic kind of place. I love it. It's a great city, but very consumeristic. There being an Indian student he was studying, doing his master's in Dallas at SMU. And we were in this group and going around. He wasn't a believer. He wasn't a Christian. And everyone was asking, I really need a raise, or that was the prayer requests that were in the Alpha group going around. Yeah. Knew a better house, or, my roommate, like a better roommate is all. And he gets to him, he goes, I thought Christianity was really about giving up of things and really giving of yourself fully to God and losing all that stuff. Yeah. And, it was very fascinating that he had seen that, but yet these people who'd grown up in a Christian society had missed, very perceptive key element.
Yeah. Because you see, when I travel around the world, when I used to get to travel around the world, and people would say, what was your PhD on? Sometimes I would be in like Georgia with some conservative Christians, or in Malmo, Sweden, with some more progressive evangelicals. And I would summarize it this way. I'd say, for evangelicals, your job, your home, and your relationship are supposed to be used in service of Jesus Christ. Every evangelical I know knows the answer to that question is yes. Yeah? My life is supposed to serve the purposes of Jesus. And then I would say, why don't we live like that then? It's as if Jesus is supposed to give me the job, home, and relationship I want. So whether you're in the Bible Belt of America or somewhere more progressive in Europe, evangelicals instinctively know that if you answer that question, that was really what I was trying to look. I probably should have led with that when I told you what I was looking at. How did we get there?
Yeah.
How do we get out? Because stumbling over my words, it seems like in a lot of ways, maybe there are elements or branches which are trying to get out of that, but it also seems like there's those that are digging their heels in.
Yeah.
And then evangelicalism is really hard to define. I've come to the conclusion evangelicalism seems to be a network of personalities and like-mindedness, but not institution.
Yeah.
So it's hard to unpack that. But how does one, if one finds oneself in consumerism and this attitude, maybe that's the better thing rather than institutionally. What's the journey that you see take place for people to get out?
Okay. Let me just make a comment on evangelicals, because the term means so many different things to different people. It means crazy, Americans storming the Capitol.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
For some people, but for those who are evangelical, it's strange. There's a technical term, an illocutionary shell noun, and basically it means this how we use language and words. We often use words and we don't define them because we generally know what they mean. So for most people who are evangelicals, roughly what it means, even though you can't say exactly what it means. When you meet an evangelical, that's a Bible Belt American evangelical. I know we're related, but they're more like the sort of something weird went on there, kissing cousins kind of thing. I know we're family, but that's the bit of the family I'm a bit embarrassed about. And then you meet other ones. It's just we have words that we use. And so evangelicalism works like that broadly. And most people know it means you're supposed to be into Jesus and the Bible in a way that other Christians aren't. And that's one of the ironies, that evangelicals, some of the most fervent evangelicals in church attendance and other stuff, talk the talk, but really, they really want the goods. They want the providence and the blessing and the goodies. So, and again, what is an evangelical? So David Bebbington is, if you're looking for a church historian to say what evangelicals are, I made Garrick read this book back in the day, would have done. And he says there are 4 things that set evangelicals apart from all other sorts of Christians, and he's debated but broadly accepted. And this means you get Methodist and Catholic and Protestant and Free Church and Charismatic, all sorts of different kinds of evangelicals. But four key things you're always going to see. So you see crucicentrism, the centrality of the cross; biblicism, high view of the Bible. If you don't think the Bible's God's word, you're not an evangelical. That's the period.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't think Jesus died and rose from the dead, and that's the most important thing, you're not an evangelical. Conversionism, that you're supposed to change. That's another thing that makes someone evangelical. You should be transformed. But the last one's the most important that Bebbington identifies, is unique. You see this really with the Wesleys and Methodism, is the birth of evangelicalism as we know it. Activism. So Calvin was quite happy to stay, where he was. He didn't, in Geneva, didn't want to go out to the rest of the world or send people. He wasn't a great missionary. But it's the method, this desire to go to the rest of the world. Wesley says the world is my parish. There's an irony. The only reason Wesley could say the world was his parish was because he could get on a ship and travel all around the world economically. Yeah. But activism. You mentioned Alpha in Dallas. There's a guy called Rob Warner who looks at how in the Western world, those four things have split apart amongst evangelicals. So you get the activist conversion people who are out there doing stuff and very focused on conversion and saving, getting people to pray prayers to go to heaven when they die. And then you've got the more fundamentalist lot who are really focused on the Bible and inerrancy and crucicentrism and the cross. You get this big split happening. So that leads me to the answer to the other question. One of the things would be to bring those four things back together as evangelicals. The Bible, the cross, conversion, and activism. But practically, what does it mean? Here's the main problem that I think I identified. Capitalism and consumerism and commodification actually are so pernicious. We're trained from birth. On a day off, what do kids do? They go shopping.
Yeah.
You navigate life. Everything in life is through buying something, an experience. Yeah. Nothing is off limits in life if you can pay for it. The aspirations, the imagination for life that parents instill in their kids is you can be anything you want, be successful, their friends and peers around. I mean, you look at what's on social, what would be called a social imaginary, Charles Taylor would say. So underneath all that, and I'm convinced of this, and it was in my research, is a very Augustinian notion that ultimately what we love and desire is what we organize our lives around. But the problem is we live in a world that trains our desires, trains us to love the wrong things. So to paraphrase all that, what you love is what you do, and then this is the vicious part of it. What you do forms what you love. And that's why it's almost impossible to break out of this. Let's put this in crude terms for you. I've done this in my church or in speaking places to say, how much money would it take for you to give up on your faith? And people are actually really honest. I say, if every financial problem you had was taken away right now, and you were financially independent, could go on holiday as much as you want, have everything that you dream and long for, but you couldn't practice your faith with other people, take part in church or mission or anything, just go to heaven when you die. How many of you would be up for that? And it's very sobering because a lot of people will go, yeah, I'd take that. Because that's what we're being offered on a daily basis. Yeah. So unless we come up with something compelling, which is what I argued in my research, is evangelicals are supposed to be about something to live for, die for, meaning, adventure, purpose. It's supposed to be about Jesus and mission and the kingdom, so much so that everything else in life just seems insignificant compared to it. So actually, I was really hopeful for evangelicals. I'll keep on rambling on here, because two things I was trying to deal with. There are a whole lot of people who, some of my friends have done this, and no disrespect to them. They've gone, the problem with consumerism, I need to make more of the church, and they become an Anglican, or some have become Catholics or Greek Orthodox. And you sort of separate yourself from the world. That's one way to deal with this.
It's kind of the Benedict option.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
Or the other one is, there has been a whole sort of emerging / pseudo missional movement that just thinks, I'll throw the baby out with the bathwater and, just play golf with my friends and I'll call that church. Mm-hmm. Just collapse everything into consumer spaces and call it church. And it isn't, because there's no conversion, there's no cost, there's no commitment. It just, so what I was sort of arguing is evangelicals they're the part of the problem. But they're supposed to be about experiencing Jesus, loving Jesus, giving your life for Jesus in a way that erupts everywhere. Nothing's off limits to that. Mm. Your work, your home, your family, that's the genus of evangelicalism in a way other expressions of Christianity might not be. So that's the potential for it. If we could recover that. Does that make any sense?
It makes a lot of sense. Do you think that during this time of COVID, it seems to me that there's a potential for a nice big reset button to be pushed, because so much of that consumerism cannot be done. And so people are reforming right now. The question is, are they reforming around the right thing? So, you're echoing Charles Taylor, James K. Smith there. We are what we do, or we love what we do. And that forms us. We had a long discussion in my church, where I'm an elder, about giving and talking about, okay, we need to kind of reform our church around giving. And I kind of presented, we would always talk about it from up front for years that I was at this church, at our church. And it would be, hey, give, because, the money that you give goes to these wonderful activities that we do. And we just thought, this is a huge, we do this because it's an act of worship, because 200 times a week, I'm bending my knee at the altar of some consuming practice. And I have an option one time a week to bend my knee at the altar of the Father and give to the person, give in a way that I have to think about and make sacrifice for. And anyway, so I think that's that there's real power in that for us within the church to be doing things, to be formed towards Jesus. Are you guys, during this time of COVID, and I know that the distancing that churches have had to do, how are y'all, if any way, able to use this as an opportunity to help people reset, as they can only go out with one person and go on a walk instead of going and buying the thing that they would normally do?
Yeah. Well, let me start with giving and segue to that, as you mentioned. So my brother became a Christian a few years ago, which was wonderful. I'm the oldest, he's the next one down. And I remember in our 20s, he was horrified that I gave 10% of my money to church when I didn't have any money and 3 little kids. And he was like, that's so abusive and controlling by the church. So I said to him, because he was really into, he became an alcoholic, but drugs and dance and raves and a whole lot of stuff. And I sat down with him and says, how much money do you spend on your lifestyle? And eventually realized he was spending 50% of his income on drugs, alcohol, and raves. Wow. And I went, you spend 50% of your income on your lifestyle, and I only spend 10% on the most important thing in my life. I said, I need to be giving more. And you know what? That stuck with him. So later on, when he became a Christian, 25 years later, we laughed about that. And at the heart of that is, you see, in consumer culture, if you downsized your house because of a hobby, like sailing or anything, everyone would say, good for you.
Yeah.
It's your life. I can sell you anything for a way of life, a bike, a hobby, a sport, a timeshare. And everybody will think that is not a sacrifice. That is the best investment of your life.
Yeah.
And yet when it comes to Christianity, if Jesus is our way of life, it shouldn't We shouldn't have to downsize. It shouldn't take up our time. It shouldn't cost any. In fact, it should make my house bigger. It should give me more money. Do you know what I mean? Like Jesus is some maximizer. It's not, so we live in a world where Jesus is not even relative to everything else. He's less.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to recover the centrality of it. So this issue of, I mean, I would love it if COVID did reset Christians. You think the number of Christians that there are, even in Europe, you know, we're in places where lots of people aren't Christians anymore, but the ones who say they are, if they were woken up and chose tomorrow to put Jesus first instead of their holidays or their leisure activities or all the other things. And it's not that those are bad, it's that those take primacy for people.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to think that would happen, and I'd love a revival to happen. The sociologist in me observing says, I'm pretty sure here's what's going to happen, because it has happened in history. When we come out of lockdown, some people are just going to go mental. I mean, they're going to go off the deep end with, I mean, I'll sound old fashioned, you know, drugs, sex, holidays. They're just going to lose themselves because that pressure, and they're going to be invited everywhere, discount everything to do that. And I think a lot of Christians are going to do that as well. They're just going to go, I'll just take a break for 6 months from my Christian life, basically, because I can get back to it. And that's the lie. I can just get back to this. It's optional. It's not. So I'm sort of warning other pastors and some of our leaders, don't be surprised. You know, we've lost people because of COVID. They just dropped off the radar. But some people are just going to, you know, flip out for a while as they decompress.
It's like they've been on a long fast on everything, and then they're
just
going to go on a bender of just stuff in their face. Yeah, that makes sense.
And we probably need an amnesty at the end of that. You know, like, hey, if you did that and you've just woken up, you know, like, hey, it's, you know, but what I'm noticing, and again, the pastors I talk to in churches, there is an increasing core of Christians. It's not some amazing revival, but they have really lent into discipleship, Christian practices. They've either discovered them and put them into place, or they've recovered them. And I think that's the most exciting thing for the church at the end of this. So the people who have discovered that in COVID, they're anchored in that, they're grounded in that. And then I'm also hoping for, you know, some sort of revival in the, because in history, this is one of those sorts of moments that could be a revival time, because revivals usually come through massive upheaval. Mm-hmm. People are going to go, was this really what I was thinking life was about? There might be an opportunity if we can lean into it. Mm-hmm. But they're going to need to see people who are living for something different.
Yeah, that's the question.
That's how the Christianity has influence in history. When people go, this particular way of living is redundant, is there anyone who's lived differently? That's one of the problems with evangelicalism, is so many just look like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So
my kids were playing my kids love oh gosh, what do we call it in English? Eurovision. And it's of course, you know, the time where all this, and Sweden is, you know, it's called Melody Festival.
Get big in Sweden.
And so it's a big deal here, right? So my kids we were telling them about past like really good songs that, you know, have gone through Melody Festival, and today my kids were playing this one song called it's called You're Amazing. Of course, it's like a love song, but I was listening to it and I was like, this could be a worship song that I've heard sung in churches, you know, like I'm feeling great. I'm feeling awesome, you know, and it's just, you're amazing. And I'm like, oh, this is totally a worship song, because it's just that it's all about me, but you made me feel good. So that's good. And we're not getting away from that consumerism. Anyway, to my shame, I probably have longed for songs like that in my own past. I think I've done some reforming of my own life, realizing even the own consumerism. It's interesting to me how much we tend to think that we go through the secular, postmodern, consumerist, capitalist, you know, whatever you want to call it, world, and we're not changed by it. But the reality is we often end up looking a lot like the world around us. We kind of accept those things, and then so it's very hard to walk through fire and not get burned in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there is no neutral place to stand, and that's one of the geniuses of evangelicals. It recognizes that it's, Jesus, the incarnation takes place within the world, erupts within the world. It's not in the church. I mean, that's partly where God is, but also in the world, and even money. I mean, that at its best, the belief that God does things through money. That's not a bad thing for an evangelical, that mission takes place everywhere, in the home, at work, in my sport and in leisure. And, that's the genius of it, because it's too tempting because to resolve that tension into all the church against the world, or there is no church. Or you probably know the phrase, so evangelicals talk about being in the world but not of it. You heard that one?
Yeah.
The problem is we've got way too much in the world.
Yeah.
And then the other one is there's evangelicals are suspicious of the church. That's a Protestant thing. But we're not in church enough. We need to find a way to be a bit less in the world and a bit more in church. And that would be better for us to be evangelicals and navigate life.
I had a great question and I just dropped it in my head.
Garrick is used to me talking over him at this point.
That's what I was going to say. I think Barrett and I have seen this in our own organization, the way missions has made this slow shift from come die, come serve, come give of yourself, to this is kind of another experience. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily happened, but the American, the American sense of global missions has shifted. You can see it, and where people come now with the high expectations of, I'm going to have this experience, as opposed to come and give of yourself completely, and maybe even suffer, or maybe even die. The difference between get on the boat with your coffin.
Yeah.
I remember when we went to the in Seoul, when we went to the
I was going to say,
the cemetery for missionaries, and there was one woman who I believe she had gotten to Korea and died within months, and her gravestone literally says, if I had another life to give, I would give it to Korea again. So something along those lines, and that power of that, in which it feels like we really have lost that across the board.
That shared experience that we had, because you and I visited that cemetery in Korea, it was unusual in that missionaries have got a bad, quite rightly so, for trying to overly westernize the world. But Korea was different, that people died there in extensive numbers and sacrificed their lives to preserve the language and the culture of the Koreans, instead of writing over it. But you and I went home and I looked up who that young girl was, who, with that phrase, if I had, another life to live, I'd give it all to, Korea again. And looked up her story. So she, like all missionaries, firstly, this is kind of shocking that back in the day, to be a missionary was her family wave her off from a church service, and she does take her coffin with her, and they know that she's probably going to die. And she does. She's only there a few weeks and she's dead. But what happened is then they have a church service to commemorate her life. And at that service, they made a call for young people to replace her. And something like 20 young people then went off to missions. So these evangelicals, so that's one of the ironies, isn't it? Life was incredibly short and brutal, but evangelicals, even families, knew that to follow Jesus was to enter into risking death. That was normal. Now, fast forward, one of the problems we've got is evangelical parents who think that following Jesus is supposed to maximize their kids' lifestyles. And you've heard of therapeutic moralistic deism, just that the parents distill God for kids down to therapy to help them feel good about themselves, deism, God's there in an emergency, and moralistic, that they won't have sex and drugs. That's what Christianity's gotten reduced to. Parents are so to blame in the consumer matrix. Whereas if we could recover that one of saying to kids, risk your life for Jesus. the life is not climbing, going to college, getting a degree, being successful, buying a house, that whole thing, because that wasn't a thing before for Christians, and that's become the dream that parents give their kids to. You see it. You might you do see it, don't you? I see it with my youth pastor. Some parents, they want their kids to be into Jesus, but not too much, as long as it doesn't mess with the plans they have for their kids doing well in the future and being financially successful, and they don't want that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's we work for an organization which brings young people over to various parts of the world, and I've noticed the parents being much more involved over the many years, going from when I went overseas, I informed my parents I'm going. They go, okay. I got on a plane. I had no idea where I was going. I stepped foot in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, and I thought, this doesn't look anything like the desert. I had no clue. I mean, I was an ignorant, American of geography. And anyway, but I mean, Garrick did similar thing going to Estonia. He got sent a binder of, okay, here's the day you report and show up. And then, now it's like, I've heard stories. I have not had this happen, but parents giving phone calls of, okay, my kid's coming over, so I need you to, do these things for the kid. And I'm not necessarily blaming the parents. I think they're just playing the role that they see that they're carrying out the values that we as a society hold dear in some respects. But it is hugely different. And I'm glad I didn't pack all my stuff in a coffin, like when at 24 years old or whatever it was, when I shipped off to Central Asia and then North Africa, I'm glad I didn't take a coffin. I took a couple of suitcases, and we didn't have dial-up internet, and I suffered for Jesus, but
Barrett's he's being very modest. Aren't you a wanted man in Uzbekistan?
I was kicked out, but there's a difference. They don't know who I am. I could sneak back in at any point. I did cross the Abu Dhabi into Afghanistan one time, and I bribed a Afghan border guard to get back into Uzbekistan because it went south. It was a crazy interaction. Anyway, all that to say, the point being, this is what we call a rabbit trail. You just really, it is different. And I even find it in my own life, though. There have been times where I have fought with God because I didn't think that he was, hey, look, God, here I am. I'm serving you, whatever else I should be getting. And you could put in a whole number of things. It could be success on the missions field. It could be a bigger house. It could be, better tasting food or whatever else. I've believed those lies. So we all do it. Yeah. It seems to me that the task then, or one of the big tasks of the let's say missions practitioner or pastor or whatever, then is to enter into that fray and point people to a better life, one that's sold out for Christ. But does that have to happen incrementally, or can that, like if your youth pastor were to go to his youth and go, get ready to die for Jesus, like, is that a call that he can make, or is it like, do we need to make this incremental, keep pushing sort of thing? Like,
so I think we have to do two things. Okay, we have to cast the net wide at every level. There's always the temptation to just narrow things down to just the one thing. So you could start something up tomorrow that, a missions organization that deliberately finds places where you've got a 90% chance of dying. Yeah. And you probably get a bunch of Christians who'd sign up for it. But I don't think it works that way. And that's the sort of standard operating procedure that people default to if they feel like they've compromised. I'll just go all in and go as high as possible. I mean, the reality was, to be a missionary 200 years ago carried a much higher risk of death just because of disease, travel. That was the only way to do it. So whereas we've got a lot safer options now. So I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I think we need both. You need, let's say, with church, missions, anything that you're doing, we need a big front door with lots of experiences, but then the invitation within that into discipleship. and to go deeper and further, and discipleship is more risk. So I think discipleship is the key to everything at the minute. If I was, even if I wasn't a pastor, I realize, it's not mission, it's not spiritual formation, it's actually discipleship. Finding a few people who really want to give their lives for Jesus. And then you do a whole bunch of other stuff around that. Jesus had big crowds of people around him. I'm not so worried about, crowds can be great. So big crowds of people, lots of experiences, lots of events, but within that, the constant, like Jesus did. Do you want to pick up your cross? It's up to you if you want to. And that's always fewer people that do that. That make any sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Jason, I do want to get to this. We are in COVID times, and everyone is going through a lot. And I know I've been reading some of your posts on mental health, and what because I think Barrett and I, we both have staff we're working with who are going through some hard times because of the anxiety. Sometimes it's just that our life has changed so much, not for the better necessarily in certain cases, but and I think we feel like a sense of, oh gosh, where are we going? What is the frontier of caring for people, caring for ourselves in the midst of a really challenging, I mean, let's just be honest, this is like a world war. We're all locked into something, and it's affecting everybody. What have you been learning? What have you been talking about with respects to that?
I suppose for anyone listening, why this topic? Because I survived significant abuse when I was a kid, suffered anxiety, depression. Both my parents committed suicide later in life, and I know a lot of those dynamics, and trying to find a way to integrate mental health and getting well with faith is a big part of my life, and it is as a pastor in a church. And people find it hard to talk about mental health anyway, and certainly Christians aren't often known for being great places to talk about mental health because of the stigma of it, as if it's a lack of faith, or that stigma just gets amplified often in church. So a few things. Mental health is not, it's normal for people to suffer from it like any other form of illness, and we think it isn't until it happens. At least 1 in 4 people are struggling with some mental health issue. Doesn't mean they've got a clinical diagnosis, but that's just in the UK. And then things like COVID amplify, so they probably cause people who wouldn't have mental health issues to get them, or it brings them on sooner. Lots of mental health issues are things that just catch up with people because of the way they're living their life and doing their life. Some of it's genetic. There's a thing called, I learned from a trauma therapist, potentially traumatic experiences. So COVID is not automatically traumatizing. Psychologists have been recognizing that some of the most resilient people in life are people who have faced traumatic incidents, that they have, it's made them resilient and they've responded to them. In fact, one of the dangers at the minute is, and especially Christians will be party to this, if they've got parents who have coddled them and protected them from the world, they're probably the least able to cope with. They're going to have the most potentially traumatic things happening to them, because trauma is what you make of things. It's not automatic that everything is trauma. Psychologists know that. It's how you respond to what happens. So if your parents, your church community have not helped you to take responsibility and go through difficulties in life, you might be finding COVID traumatizing. So my millennial kids tell me that their generation is saying, I've never experienced anything like this. Now, I'm old enough, born in 1969. I left home when I was 18, had to make my way in the world and get a job, and there was no such thing as the internet and iPhones and Starbucks and multiple holidays a year to nice destinations, and life was very different then. Not that I
you
want my
didn't fall
kids.
off the edge of the earth.
No, I didn't. Not that I'd want my
amazing.
kids to go back to that, but they just realize. I mean, my kid. I see that with my kids saying how remarkably protected they've been in life as a generation. So it will be interesting to see how much COVID, again, sociologically, does affect people. I mean, I get so tired of it on the radio and TV here, the clickbait sensationalizing.
Yeah.
And there was someone the other day saying, for every month a kid is out of school, they will have X percentage less earnings for the rest of their lives. And I'm like, what a load of crap. Absolutely. You can't.
How on earth did you predict that?
I don't know. Some of these professors and sociologists, they sit there and they just dice up your life and go, well, that number of years equals this and is that. When in actual fact, what you and I know is some of the most amazing things happen when you are under stress, when you are pressured. Some of these young people may turn out to be the most resilient because they had an experience of life that the generation before them was protected from. So, kids are remarkably resilient, and there may be I'm sure there are going to be ones that find it hard to socialize and reconnect and do stuff, but I don't think it's that zero-sum game. And again, look at history, the greatest moments in history, wars, plagues, human resilience, and factoring God doing things with people. So with mental health, we all suffer from it, potentially traumatic experiences, being kind to one another. I think this was a thought I had the other day, a lot of the conspiracy theory, weirdness, absolute mental stuff that's going around at the minute, and even with Christians, I think a lot of that is going to go away when people aren't stuck at home for months on end with nothing but social media to look at. I think it is I think a lot of it is a manifest conspiracy. There's the whole psychology of conspiracy theories and all that kind of stuff.
I listened to a podcast the other day of a guy who studies the conspiracy theories. And his point was just that. He said, look, you put in the mix of COVID and everyone just on social media. And he said, it's not that people are believing in more conspiracies. It's just that they now are focusing them on a few, and then they're kind of narrowing in. So anyway, fascinating stuff. But yeah, I think you're right. COVID has it's just allowed people. Yeah, it's just, that's a great way to put it, Garrick. It's steroids for that.
Yeah, it is. So I'm not sure I answered your question.
I gave you pretty vague questions.
Broad remit. I mean, we're introducing a ministry in our church. There's a thing in the UK called Kintsugi. I mean, that's the name for the Japanese art with the bowl, the broken bowl that you put back together, and it looks beautiful because it's put together with blue and gold, and there's a ministry in the UK, and it's beautiful. It's in the church, and that's exploded. We've got a bunch of people in our church training in it, and it's making a well-being space that people can come to and can talk about, depression, anxiety, all the things that normally they just haven't got a space to go to, where they get empathy and a peer where people aren't trying to be experts and fix them, but just be human beings together. And it's so we're trying to lean into that because we recognize that people in our church will need it, but their friends and family. So when their friends and family are drinking too much or whatever they do as we come out of COVID, or having tough times, and they can see that they're not coping, say, hey, got this great place, you might find it helpful to talk with these people. So there'll be huge opportunities.
Working in London, so a big topic we always talk about is doing whatever it is, ministry mission in Western Europe. And I think we kind of talked a little bit about it in the sense of, obviously consumerism has a lot to do with secularism, and how, we're kind of in that world, in that soup. What do you, as a church planter, as a pastor for many years, what do you see as the future of the church in Western Europe, particularly, or maybe the West?
Wow.
Small questions here.
Small question.
Small question. I hate trying to predict the future.
Yeah.
Which future will I just get it wrong anyway?
Yeah.
Who could have predicted all the things we're going through now?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, I guess the question is: Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic?
I'm optimistic in that.
Mm-hmm.
You look through church history and think human beings done some pretty bad things to stuff up history, and yet God still managed to find people and have them know him and do mission and church and faith in history. God finds people. And I'm more, the more I look at history, I'm like, God reminds me, it's like, history is his. You know, it's one of the things, if you learn some theology, salvation history, God is Lord of history. So I think sometimes we can feel like, I mean, we have a responsibility to respond to culture and forces and be faithful. So that's the first thing. I take a much more positive view than I used to.
Mm-hmm.
And within that it's okay for things to ebb and flow. If the church died out in the West, it won't die out in the rest of the world. You know, the church has died out in many places in history for lots of reasons. So, you know, I hope it doesn't. God finds people, God's Lord of history. And I think where faithfulness is greatly underrated, you know, just the faithfulness of the church to live differently. If the best thing we can do is not try to, not get in bed with politics in the way that Christians too often, certain kinds of Christians do. And that's just is the wrong way. But like I said, living differently, living for Jesus is the best thing we can do, you know, and that can transform whole communities. Just a handful of people can totally transform communities. So faithful, passionate pursuit of Jesus, more than large numbers of people. Large numbers of people often don't make a big difference. It's just a big crowd. But a few people really can change the world. So I'm optimistic and hopeful for that. And I think certainly the mood music and the things I'm hearing, again, from the networks that I'm in, is a real refocusing on discipleship by the church. And I think the realization that a lot of us have known there's been an obsession with bums on seats and numbers of people. But when you're forced to do what you do differently, I think people have either had to lean into that or they're not doing anything. And then now we need to keep this that's my greatest hope, that I would predict if people will look, if a revival happens, great. I really would love that to happen. But I think people will say a certain number of Christians were more faithful, and that the church in the West rediscovered discipleship. I think that's what is going to unfold for the next 10 years or so. That would be a prediction.
When you say discipleship, can you explain a little bit about what you're thinking when you say that? Because I think it's easy for everyone who listens, depending upon their context, that they have immediate words that come into mind, but maybe you have a specific idea, and I'd love to hear what you're thinking of when you say discipleship.
So in our church, we started, I learned this from Will Mancini, with a thing called Future. He's got a great book, Future Church. If you want to get a book, it's really excellent. One of those guys who says that you think, I spent 8 years doing a PhD, and here's a guy who comes along and comes with one of the best overviews of the church that I've seen, and puts it into nice sound bites that people understand far better than my academic work. But he talks about upper room and lower room moments. That discipleship is predominantly about the upper room. Lower room stuff is events, programs, and experiences. So he uses an analogy. If you ask a 12-year-old kid what do they want for their birthday, they'll say, I want a game or a bike, or an iPhone. Concrete things. If you ask a parent what they want for their kid, they'll talk about conceptual stuff, upper room stuff. They'll say meaning, purpose, the much more nebulous things that are less concrete. And a lot of Christians live their life in the lower room. They want friends, they want fun, they want games, they want toys. And if they don't have those, They don't like it. But the invitation from Jesus is the upper room.
Mm-hmm.
And conceptual stuff is much harder we can be passionate about it, but to live it and describe it and do it. So we've been trying to find language in our church for discipleship, because again, it's one of those things, people know what it is, but don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So we're playing around with some of the language, but we're sort of landing on discipleship is, what is God saying to me? And what am I going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
Because the first thing requires you seeking God and having the whole of your life open to him and saying, God, what are you saying to me about my money? What are you saying to me about my work? What are you saying to me about my identity? Whereas a lot of the time for Christians, we keep all those things, we keep them all off limits to God, or there's compartmentalized. So it's that I will open up my life. God, what are you saying to me? And then the corollary with it is, what am I going to do? Because if you don't do something, you're not a disciple. If God says to you, go, and you don't, you're not a disciple. God says, do this, and you don't, you're not a disciple.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing we do is we're saying, as church leaders, Christians, friends, how can we help you? What's God saying to you? What are you going to do about it? And you see how that's very different than, I want you to do something for me, which is often what people want. That's the consumer mentality. I want this experience. I want, even God, I want you to get me this, do this for me.
Right.
But the way of the cross is participation. That's ultimately what Jesus does. He makes a way for us to participate with him. And God, what are you saying? What am I going to do about it?
Mm.
So that's the language we're using for discipleship. And then it could be anything. That's the exciting thing. I mean, could you imagine if every Christian, it wouldn't have, but if every Christian woke up tomorrow and said, God, what do you want to say to me? And what should I do about it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's powerfully simple too. I think often in our discipleship models, we break it down to like, these are the things you've got to know. Yeah. These are the things you've got to do, right? Give, or and those are all good things, important part. But breaking it down into the simple kind of question of, God, what do you want me to do? What do I need to do as I interact with you and the community that I'm in? What am I called to do? I think that's beautifully simple but powerful.
So what we're doing in our church, I mean, we'll build back. We'll have Sunday services and kids ministry and youth events and programs, and they're not bad. They're great ways. We want to connect with people, and we want to fish, and we want people to come into felt needs seminars and all that kind of stuff. But we want the places where they get invited into. Our mission statement in our church is inviting people into their first and next encounter with God. So to spot people who've had an encounter and then invite them into the next. Discipleship is inviting people into more encounters with God.
Mm-hmm.
Not giving them things or helping. It's like, do you want to encounter God more so that you can say, what's God saying to me? What am I going to do about it? So
how do you protect against if a consumer hears the word encounter, what they could filter that through is, okay, what am I going to get?
Yeah.
So how do you protect against for those who come in? How do you protect it? I grew up I grew up both in Vineyard and let's say Pat Guano crazy charismatic things as well, and then shifted over to Bible church, and anyway, so I've had a very broad spectrum, but there can be that tendency to go, I want to treat the encounter. So a consumer has a good meal, and then the search becomes, I want a better meal. And so how do you as a church, especially a Vineyard church, protect against the encounter syndrome of, well, I had a great encounter last week, and that means next week I'm going to have an even better one. And so when that doesn't come back, there's a disappointment, or there's a culture that says this is the standard of encounter, and so we just got to keep bumping it up. And again, let me just say, just for importance sake, I'm all for the encounter part. So even though I grew up in something that was different, that's fine.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, because we're just so hideously prone to it. The number of times, again, pastors are just as bad. I can go to an evangelism conference, be massively moved about evangelism, have the Holy Spirit fall upon me, be convinced that I need to engage in evangelism, and then go home and do absolutely nothing because I had an experience. That's one of the problems of experience. We mistake feeling something for having done something. I mean, it's the process of reification. This is at the root of consumer culture. It makes it takes a feeling about something or having done something. We go to a rock concert to make poverty history and mistake singing a song and holding up our phones with lights as we ended poverty. No, you didn't. You had an experience. And so we have to be aware of it. Secondly, I think we have to name what encounter with God is and what it's not in some way. So we're trying in our church to develop language, because we've got good language, and I think a lot of churches do. If you want to belong, do this. If you want to take part, do this. We've got those things, what you call assimilation. But discipleship language is, we're trying this out. It's normal for Christians too. ... And the way that we're getting, because it's conceptual, the way that we're learning and reaching for this is stories of transformation. So have you seen the TV series The Chosen?
A little bit of it, yes. It's done well. It's done well.
Absolutely amazing. Our whole church is watching it because we're saying, look, do you want to follow? This is the Jesus who says, come follow me. And it's done so well. We absolutely loved it. It's having a big impact, because do you want just stuff or experiences, or do you want this Jesus says, come follow me? Will you follow him? That's what discipleship is, following Jesus, saying yes to him. But anyway, this whole encounter and the yes thing and the chosen is just so powerful, because it lets you describe that's what it looks like. Anyway, there's a beautiful bit where they take the supposition of Mary Magdalene and what she was like before and after in the TV series The Chosen. And it's done so beautifully for meeting Jesus and his deliverance of her. And again, in church history, we know that Mary Magdalene was set free by Jesus and ended up following him and spending time with him. But there's the character Nicodemus. And again, this is all supposition, but it's done so beautifully from what we know of the characters. And basically, Mary Magdalene said, Nicodemus says, "Because what happened to you?" Because he saw her before she met Jesus and was delivered. And she basically says this: well, I was this, and now I'm like this. And it was because of him. And it's just so stunningly simple. That's what discipleship is. I was like this, now I'm this, and it was because of Jesus. So we are trying to collect more and more stories of transformation. So rather than stories of experience, rather stories of I felt this, we're actually asking people, describe what you were like, describe how you've changed, and what did Jesus do? Because then that story is a lot more than I went and I felt, or I went and I was convicted. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And then hopefully people go, I want that. I want transformation. And transformation is not just the feels.
And even if people don't want it, I think being in Sweden, I've come to the conclusion that even if people don't want it, the few of us who would go to that's the most God honoring thing we could do. And so then that makes it so it has the added benefit of also being right. like it's just like I think there are times in ministry where it was, well, I want to do this because I'm hopeful that it'll pay off for the big payoff in the long run of more seats or more souls or whatever else.
Yeah.
And I think I missed kind of the meaning of it, when at the end of the day it was, no, cultivate faithfulness as an exile in the land. And that becomes then the testimony. And obviously then life change happens and people want to be around life change. It doesn't necessarily mean that droves will be around. The crowds left Jesus, but those who knew him best and were affected by him most were ultimately, led faithful lives.
Well, I was looking at the story of the parable of the rich young man ruler.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to write a book on mental health and spiritual formation at the minute, but if I write another book after that, I might call it The Missing Disciple. So you see, Jesus gathered huge crowds, had compassion on people, fed them, cast out demons, healed the sick, and told them they should live differently. The kingdom of God is like this. Now go and live like this. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But he was quite selective at choosing the disciples and ruthlessly focused on them who made it. And as you know, in some of the Gospels, the retelling, it's probably 2 years into ministry. He goes up on a mountain, comes down, prays, and names the disciples, calls them out of the larger group of disciples. And you wonder what he saw and how he chose. But you've got this young guy, the rich young ruler, comes to Jesus, and he says, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, this is what you need to do. And this guy goes, I've done this since I was, since my mother brought me up. And then suddenly it's almost like Jesus is going through the motions. And then it says, Jesus looked at him and loved him. Mm-hmm. Could you imagine that? Jesus to look at you and love you. Mm. And then that's where you got John 14. Jesus says, if you, those who obey me will be loved by me and my Father. Mm. You know the passage, obedience to Jesus and the Father. So Jesus is like, oh, and then it's astonishing. Looked at him and loved him. Didn't look at him, chastise him, criticized him, but then he invited him and he says, one thing you lack. Do you like these other guys? Sell everything you have. Come follow me. He was being invited to be a disciple.
Yeah.
And he went, no. And when I first became a Christian, I was only 17 and I played that game of, which disciple would I be? Yeah? You ever do that one? You start reading the Gospels, you're like, because I didn't start reading the Bible till I was 17. And then I was like, I suddenly realized that I assumed that every Christian was a disciple and had said yes to Jesus saying, come follow me. But you quickly realize, no. A lot of people just show up on a Sunday or they want to be part of the crowd. They want to get fed. They want to be healed, but they don't want to do that bit. And in some ways it's okay.
Yeah.
I think churches can't be, and this is back to how you resolve this. Some people have tried to make church so small, so intense that you have just a few people who are doing all the discipleship things and they're stifling. But the discipleship might be something just a few people really do, but they bless the multitudes and the crowds and the other people. And I'm not sure. I'm rambling here. This is the rabbit. This is what I'm thinking out loud. And so in our church, here's what we're doing. We've got a few people together, and we said, and I wish I'd done this when I started the church. So it's not that discipleship doesn't happen in our church, because it does, but we've got a few groups together with a few people, and we're saying to them, we're looking for people who really want to be all in. That if Jesus walked through the door and said, in COVID, come follow me, who's really up for that? Dying to themselves in every area of their life, listening to God and saying yes, as best as we know. And with those few people, we're doing that. And we're meeting together as peers and saying, what's God saying to you about money, evangelism, the word, your lifestyle, your identity? And not ruthlessly, but really vulnerably saying, come on, what's God said to you? What are you going to do about it? And how can we help you? Because we hope that will be a fire in the rest of the church that will infect other people. Now, not everybody's going to want to do that, and that's absolutely fine. There you go. Sorry, rambling.
No, it's beautiful.
That's great. Yeah, beautiful. Jason, we're getting low on time, but we would be very remiss to not mention, I think, one of the something that blessed my life tremendously. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. But Portland Seminary's, oh my gosh, it's LGP, Leadership and Global Perspectives. I blanked there for a second. But give us a plug. I'll just say it was one of the greatest decisions I did, and one of the best things. I was tremendously blessed by it, and still reaping the rewards many years after. But what is it? How can people get involved? I'm sure there are people sitting out there.
Yeah,
who,
I mean, it's a doctor of ministry. It's been going just over 10 years, about 120 graduates from it now. And its focus is on leadership and understanding our global world. And, we'll hopefully start back this year after COVID, going to South Africa. So students get to travel the world, have peers and mentors. It's a professional doctorate. So they're doing research on ministry, NGO, leadership contexts that they're in. And we try to understand this crazy world that we're in, from, consumerism to, what's happening in politics and leadership and issues of anxiety and differentiation and all those kinds of things, so that people can be good leaders and have a global experience for where they are in the world. An exciting development is we think we're about to get accreditation and agreement to turn the Doctor of Ministry into a Doctor of Leadership, because we've recognized there are a lot of people who are, they're educated enough, but they don't have a Doctor of Ministry. And that will be exciting, because it'll open the door to people who are like, I'm a teacher, or I'm a social worker, or I'm a missionary, or I'm an NGO leader, or I'm a business and entrepreneur, and don't want to go to a secular leadership school or college, but don't want to do some sort of crass sort of biblical leadership thing, want to do real leadership formation with Christian formation behind it. So yeah, that's where the program's hopefully going. And anyone with a master's anywhere in the world will be eligible to do a Doctor of Leadership. It'll be the first of its kind from in the US and from Portland Seminary, I believe.
Very exciting.
I may have to look into that.
I will highly recommend it, Barrett. You would love it. I'll just say that.
I mean,
and you get to go
I have a master's in Christian leadership, but I should go for the doctorate too. Actually, I think that
exactly. You would be able to, without a master's of without a master's of divinity, you could do a Doctor of Leadership. And you get a 3 continents, perhaps some peers. You would take a project close to your leadership context, and take all your learning and produce something that impacts the environment you're in and grows you as a leader, plus what you're doing, and have a Doctor of Leadership. Be great.
Jason, where can people find you in addition to Portland Seminary and your church? Or actually, if your church does podcasts or sermon series or whatever else, where can they find you?
If people want to find everything, I've got a website, Jason Swan Clark. It's a middle name, jasonswanclark.org. Or if you just put Jason Clark and church into Google, it'll pull it up. And on that, my website, I've got my blog, podcast, links to the church things, Portland Seminary, everything's awesome. On there. So if you just do Jason Swan Clark, it'll just stick it in Google, you'll find me and everything I do.
Great. Yeah, the Google gnomes are really good about putting in the right wires in places.
Tracking it down.
Well, Jason, thank you so much.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for taking the time to talk to a couple
with
guys from Texas.
And it's good to do some recruitment for the Doctor of Leadership.
Don't tell my wife anytime soon. Okay.
Yeah, I think you've got a crew guy going through it, or recently went.
Yeah,
through,
Sean.
Sean Kramer. Sean
Kramer.
Kramer.
Awesome. Oh, cool. Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Your crew guys have been awesome. We need more people from crew.
Okay, we'll try to. I've tried to talk a few people into it, but I think I'll keep working on it.
Awesome.
Well, you may get some people from Croatia. This is the 5th ranked religious podcast in Croatia.
Hey, excellent.
I have no idea even what that means, but I got an email about it the other day. I'm quite proud about it.
We're begging for
awesome. Thanks, guys.
All right, well, Jason.
Thank you. It's great to see you, Jason. And
excellent.
When this thing ends up, come on down to southern Spain. And
I know. I need to. Thanks, guys.